Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the Complex Trauma Training Center. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. If you're a mental health professional working with complex trauma and are interested in learning the neuroaffective relational model, we're excited to share with you about our upcoming NARM therapist trainings. The NARM therapist training is an advanced clinical training designed for licensed mental health professionals, current mental health graduate students, and active clinical interns and trainees, where you will get trained in a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach for resolving the long-term impacts of ACEs and CPTSD. As you are learning and integrating NARM, you will receive individualized support from a team of skilled, passionate, and supportive trainers, led by faculty members Brad Kammer, Stephanie Klein, and Marsha Black. If you're working in the field of complex trauma, we encourage you to register now to get trained in NARM. For more information and to reserve your spot, please visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com. And now for our interview. Throughout a career spanning more than 15 years in the mental health field, Alex White has been continually inspired by the transformative power of the therapeutic process. Alex is a NARM master therapist and has served as a NARM training assistant since 2022. He currently runs a private practice in Salt Lake City, Utah, focusing on issues such as religious trauma, LGBTQ+ issues, compassion fatigue, burnout, shame, relationship difficulties, and masculinity. Alex also serves as adjunct faculty in the counseling program at Westminster University. Sabrena Ness is a clinical mental health counselor in Utah and a licensed professional counselor in Colorado. She earned her Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from the University of Wyoming. Sabrena is the clinical director of LifeStance Health in Utah and also serves as a co-chair for the Pacific Northwest region of LifeStance's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging chapter, where she focuses on fostering an inclusive and supportive workplace culture. Sabrena is a NARM master therapist and serves as a NARM training assistant. Please enjoy my conversation with Sabrena Ness and Alex White. All right. I am lucky to be sitting here with Sabrena and Alex. Welcome both of you to Transforming Trauma.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. And as you both know, we often start with this question of what is it that you would like our listeners to walk away with from our conversation today?
I think, my hope in this is that listeners have a chance to get to know us a little more personally. I think that's something that I've always valued about this community is not just the work in the model, but the people who are in it. And so hope to, build some connections in that respect and look forward to sharing about the training that we'll be hosting here in Salt Lake City in 2026.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about having a deeper understanding of NARM and what complex trauma is, and that some of the things that we are going to share about our experience might spark curiosity for someone to either read the book, The Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma, or even just if you're a therapist, attending that level 2, or maybe encourage someone to deepen their understanding of complex trauma in general.
I love it. I love both those intentions. Thank you for bringing those forward. So I wonder if first, speaking to Alex's point, if we could just hear a little bit about both of you and what brought you to this work and kind of your place in the world and where you come from.
Yeah. So what brought me to even working with trauma was in grad school, I was first heard about complex trauma. And there wasn't much information about it. Definitely was mentioned, but wasn't much information about it. But I remember being sparked with curiosity about this makes more sense in my own life. I don't have these specific incidences where I'm like, oh, that was shock trauma or this, big event that happened. However, there were these things that I did in life that I didn't quite understand. And it started to make sense that, okay, maybe this idea of, I think the only thing I really knew about it in school was that it was trauma that happened over time, And so I was like, okay, that makes sense. I don't have this one event. And I kind of put it aside. I don't remember doing much with it at that point. And then I started working in a community mental health was my first job outside of school. And in that, I grew quite frustrated with using a lot of behavioral models that I was being kind of introduced to. And, I'm grateful for the learning now. But at the time, I remember just being like, I have these clients coming in they're talking about their struggles with symptoms and, they want to fix this relationship or they want this to be different in their life. And we can see some change in me giving some of these behavioral strategies or behavioral interventions to them. But I grew really frustrated that it felt like we weren't getting to something deeper. It's hard to know what the language I had then versus now is, but I just remember being very frustrated. And this actually sparked conversations with Alex's mom, Marcia, who's part of the community, the NARM community. And I started having conversations with her about this frustration. Also, Alex's dad is a therapist. So it's having conversations with both of them about my frustrations with working with these behavioral models. And it led them both sharing how they work with clients. I think Alex's dad uses schemas and he has different things that he talks with clients about. And then Marcia started talking about NARM and just sharing her story and relationship with NARM and how she got started in the community. And that I was immediately interested, but I also got a part of me that was I want to do this on my own. I want to find my own ways of learning about NARM. But I really did value both Marcia and John's input. And so I first picked up the book, the first book, and I honestly read it in pieces. I definitely didn't read the whole thing, but I remember picking it up from time to time and reading it and being interested. And it wasn't until I started understanding more about that complex trauma, it was revisiting what had happened in school for me, that I realized, wow, this is exactly what I, have been looking for. I want to work on the deeper foundations of what's happening for clients and not just these behaviors that they're coming in for. And so I think that was the first introduction to NARM. And to kind of even speak about getting involved, I did actually the first online basic training in, I think, 2021. I did it at the end of the year and I did one weekend and then was I'm hooked. I just jump in, I don't know what I'm doing. Really, I always talk about it as a coming home. It felt like this is what I thought therapy was internally for me and why I went into the field. And also, I think I needed it personally. So every year I've kind of taken a different level and I'm TAing again this year as a lead TA. So
cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I just want to give a moment for that to land for listeners, because I imagine some maybe listening who are considering the therapist training or just kind of in their own process of, and I appreciate that you named also feeling, I don't know what you would call that, where you were wait, but I want to find my own way. And so we all kind of come to this work and navigate our way through. And yeah, so I appreciate you sharing that. Anything else you want to say about that?
Yeah, I now have the language to call it my, some of my autonomy strategies are coming out of I want to do this on my own, which is so interesting. Joining a training isn't doing it on my own or something. But, so I find that interesting. Now I have the language. I don't know that I could have said that.
Yeah, we can just kind of be with where we were then and where we are now and all of that. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Thank you, Sabrena. And Alex, I'd love to hear from you a little more about your journey to the work and your background.
Yeah, thanks. So as Sabrena mentioned, I was raised by two clinical psychologists in the San Francisco Bay Area. And, I think as much as there was never anything really pushed on any of us in that respect, I think there was just the way that we were raised was, how can you not, was sort of influenced by those kinds of principles and just ways of, responding to issues or conflicts or concerns. And so I think it built a foundation that took some time to crystallize, because for a while I similarly was who would want to listen to people's problems for a living? What a boring job. They've been very gracious about never reminding me of that and saying, I told you so. But I'd always been interested in people and understanding them and found different sort of volunteer opportunities and ways to, I think, operationalize that during, high school and into college. And I think my own autonomy stuff led me to pursue a major that was not consistent with, psychology or mental health in any way, but my minor was in psychology, and I look back, it's like, those are the classes that were most interesting for me. And, I think I sort of, not really knowing what to do after my undergraduate degree, sort of followed some of that, even if I didn't really have words for it, and ended up working at a therapeutic group home in Jackson Hole, which is where Sabrena and I met a few years later. And, these were kids who were court ordered there. They were teenagers. And what I look back on now is that the training was, as much as, this is 2009, like the training, NARM wasn't even really a formalized process yet in any way. But a lot of the ways that we were trained was really consistent with that, wherein, it was, we were talking about kids coming in, like we weren't really focusing at all on diagnosis or really much on like even personal history or even the reasons that they got there necessarily, like the, transgressions from the law that might have landed them in our care. But really, they supported us in understanding sort of how this kid is prone to, relating to themselves and to the world and to, adults in their lives, usually with really good reason. And, I think I realized like I'd had this, pretty cushy, sheltered experience going to college and then kind of jumped into this pretty intense direct care role, and eventually realized like, if I'm going to figure out how to do this work that I enjoy, like I need to understand how to work with these kids effectively. And I think what that looked like was starting to try and, understand and be curious about how they saw the world, and that how I could show up in a way that was supportive or reparative. There was a lot of emphasis on, consistency and structure and support, but also like empathy and understanding and meeting each kid where they were at. And so I think I found ways to really sustain and connect with students and have these really meaningful interactions with them, more kind of experientially than conceptually. Like there were different trauma frameworks that we were, taught about, but at the end of the day, like it's hard to know the work without just jumping in and seeing what works and what doesn't. And, ultimately, I mean, these kids, as I look back now, had, layers and layers of complex trauma that, they were showing up with. And one of the things that I'd appreciated was just how there was this message that it makes sense that they're yelling. It makes sense that they're sneaking out. It makes sense that they're, failing out of school, right? Like we're not pathologizing the behavior, but more trying to understand like how it might have served them or how it might have made sense within the context that they were in. And, and I think I got to a point where that, like I just reached the limitation of how I think effective I could be without a graduate degree at a certain point after several years, and was, kind of dragging my feet and being like, well, maybe I'll just ski for one more winter and then, and then, figure it out, do that grad school thing after that. And, eventually I, got out of my own way and hopped into it, and had kind of a, twists and turns throughout grad school, but landed myself in Salt Lake City in 2019. And then the pandemic happened pretty shortly thereafter. And I was newly licensed and still felt like I was sort of throwing things at a wall when it comes to doing therapy. Like, and I look back now as like probably the times that I felt most effective and maybe the work was the most meaningful was not when I was giving a skill set or a strategy or a worksheet. I always hated doing that kind of thing. But just when we were able to sort of be human together, even if I didn't really have a concept of the intentionality in that. And so I was a part of the first online basics training that they launched really shortly after the pandemic started, and found concepts and understanding and intentionality to a lot of the things that I'd started to connect to experientially, even, before grad school and that kind of thing, bringing together these different concepts and ideas that I think had resonated for me, but weren't held together in any kind of more holistic way. And I've really kind of just dove in since then. I've have not taken a year off of any kind of NARM thing since then, whether it's been as a TA or a training. And that really informs the work that I do with everybody these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing a bit about your path to get where you are. And both of you shared, some personal pieces in there. I wonder if there's anything else you'd be willing to share kind of from a personal experience regarding NARM. I mean, Alex, I'm even thinking of this last piece where you said, I haven't taken a break from NARM since I dove in. And I think that speaks, a lot of us, I think, have that experience. It's once we get involved, it's nourishing in ways. I'll speak for myself. I feel like it's been nourishing in ways that I've really needed personally. And so I wonder if either of you could speak to that a little bit.
I'm sure we both could. Not to speak for you, Alex, but just seeing your face. It's something that comes to mind, which it's interesting because I didn't even think about talking about it today, but it feels so true and it's coming up right now. So I want to share it. And I think it ties to even my journey of moving. I'm from Minnesota. I moved away from Minnesota, kind of chased the mountains for a little bit, lived in Telluride, Colorado, and then moved to Jackson. And that's where Alex and I met. We actually met through mutual friends playing broom ball, which is pretty interesting now to think about the journey because I obviously didn't know it then, but now I see, Alex, you and your family have been such a huge part of my growth path, leading to go to school, but also personally. And, I am dating Alex's sister. And when I met his sister through Alex, that is when I realized I was interested in women and for the first time. And so it's something had never even thought about. And I think part of it is now I have the language for it, but I had these strategies growing up, or Alex mentioned behaviors that I did to help protect myself and my environment. And they were to really love everything I was in. So I grew up in a Christian private school and I loved it. I embraced everything about it. And I think that's still true today. There were parts of that. But I also realized now I was shutting down so many parts of myself. And I did so good at it. I had such strong strategies that I never even allowed myself to learn about myself and who I am. Going to college was the first taste of that. Of starting to understand myself. I moved away from the life that I knew and I was just a couple hours away, but that distance alone helped me really start to ask questions. I think, certain classes to ask questions of myself of what do I actually believe? What feels right and true for me? And through that, I started to see a shift in things, nothing huge, but I remember even my freshman year writing papers about topics politically or whatnot that are so different than what I believe now. And by my senior year, I actually had rewritten a paper that I wrote for a class that just sharing about the difference of views that how those things have shifted about women's rights and, things that are really hard for me to talk about now, knowing what I felt then. And so this wraps into chasing the mountains, moving to Jackson. And in that time when I think I was finally in a place when I met Miranda that I was like, wow, I know what it feels like to be close to myself. And I know what it feels like to make a decision for myself. And I have said this in the NARM community before, but I honestly believe that choosing to be in a relationship with Miranda or even pursuing that relationship was the first decision I feel like I've ever made completely based on my authentic self. And it felt, still to this day, it feels so real to be able to say that. I also, when I started the training, the NARM training, I didn't even realize, actually the master's probably more this last year, realized how much healing I had not done from this place of I jumped in and was like, this is who I am. And so I'm going to embrace it and I'm going to be this person. and I'm going to be in this relationship no matter what anyone thinks, which I really value that part of myself. However, it did shut down all this pain and grief and hurt that I had. And through the NARM as a whole, but the masters where we really dive into what's coming up for us and internally what's happening for us, I realized I had so much more healing to do, and I still do, but it was an immense start that really helped me jumpstart working on that healing of things that I shut out, pain of people who maybe didn't accept me, or my own beliefs or thoughts, or my internal homophobia that I didn't want to accept or acknowledge. And NARM gave me the language, it gave me the platform, it gave me the place to be able to really heal that, which has brought me even closer to my authentic self, which is something I could never give back to NARM in all the ways that it gave to me. And it's interesting, as I'm saying this, I'm catching myself saying, I did that. NARM didn't do anything, right? NARM was the material, but I used that material to heal myself. And I think that's what's so powerful about NARM being such a depth-oriented model and not being about these behaviors. It's really about healing and deeper change.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sabrena, for sharing so openly. I'm just part of what's really landing for me about what you said is this piece around like NARM, the NARM community, the NARM model, like it provides us this support and we choose whether or not to take in that support. I mean, that's what I'm really hearing from you is like you're making these choices to continually deepen into that, which is so beautiful.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it took me a few years to even be involved in NARM before I think I would go into some of that territory. I was like, oh, I'm doing the work. I'm doing the work. And it's interesting. I feel like there's always deeper layers. It's complex, it's, and I say that to my clients all the time. They're like, this is so confusing and hard. And I feel like my mind is all over. And I'm like, it's because it's complex.
Yeah.
So I try to remind myself of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I feel really touched, hearing you share about that part of your experience. I've got my own, and Alex, maybe you'll be willing to share a little bit more of yours, but I'm just thinking of how this work, it does really can touch us so deeply and so personally. It's not just a professional training. It ends up being so much more for those of us that are willing to see it that way. So, Alex, I saw you nodding your head. I wondered if there was anything you were thinking or holding.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, as much as the circumstances are different, there's a lot of things I can relate to from Sabrena's story, even just for when we met. Like, I think we were both I guess I can speak for myself. I was very comfortable with my strategies. Like, I'm a very good teammate, community member, but part of that historically has been sort of fitting in the way that the community needed me to, or the team needed me to be, or whatever, maybe like I played a lot of years of team sports. And so was very good at putting the team's needs above my own, which is great in that context. But I think, what I now realize is the ways in which that has also served to hold me back from, what's most meaningful or what I really want. And, realize like after Jackson, which was a community that I was very connected to and really loved, I moved to Florida for 2 years, which was a big cultural shift, for a post-grad internship in pursuit of my licensure. And I was, looking back now, I was just at a loss of what to do with myself without the sort of community with which I'd used to identify with. And, as much as I think there was a lot of growth in those hard times. Like I felt, lonely and disconnected and just so far away from myself, and, would have like a random Saturday and not know what to do with it because, there wasn't the community event, or there weren't the friends who were reaching out, or there wasn't the context through which I'd come to sort of fit myself into. And so I think looking back, it's evident just the extent to which there was all of this, personal, healing that I just didn't have the sort of wording or bandwidth to do. I'm very good at saying like, oh, it's not that big a deal. Like other people have more important things going on or whatever it might be. And honestly, that was probably true for most of my time in the online basics training where I was like, oh, I don't know how much I relate to any of this. Like it's good use for my clients, but I think there was actually towards the end of that time, and in the master's training, we talk about parental narcissism. And, I'm not a parent of a person, but realize the extent to which that showed up for me when parenting a puppy. Just the level of pressure I put on myself, working so hard and feeling so just awful and ineffective and insufficient when the things that I was supposed to be doing didn't seem to be working. And it really threw me for a loop in a way that I was not expecting, which now I sit with parents in therapy who are like, I didn't think it was going to be this hard. I'm like, I hear you. And, so by the time I got into this training, I think I was seeing these parts of myself that, as Sabrena mentioned, were just, became aware of these parts that were not healed or not even really acknowledged. And then started to see, start to connect with myself more through the material, not just through a client lens of like, oh, this person is showing up with these kinds of dynamics, but started to see like, oh, there's some attunement stuff that I carry. Oh, there's some autonomy stuff that I carry. And what feels really special is the extent to which within these kinds of trainings and the community more broadly, there's sort of a space and acknowledgement and holding of those kinds of things in a way that I don't think I've really experienced in a lot of other years of my life or areas of my life. The honoring of the strategies and honoring of our humanity and creating a space in these trainings and during active coaching and the stuff where we can be messy and stress and be pressuring. I mean, I came out of a training yesterday and I was sitting there afterwards. I was like, God, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. I've been a TA now this is my third year. And I'm like, okay, well, the strategies aren't too far away. And, I think that there is something about my ability to acknowledge that and be with that is a testament to the work, the processing, the space that I've held for myself or learned to hold through for myself by being a part of, of this community and why I continue to commit to it, because it's hard to have a space where I think I don't know a lot of other spaces where our humanity can be first and foremost, beyond being therapists, beyond being professionals, and that the best work can't happen if we're not human. At least that's true for me, and this is true yesterday in training. And I think that's I think it's a continual process for myself as well. I've got my NARM therapist who lives in Germany, and we every other week we check in about how I'm pressuring myself or criticizing myself, and find that to be a nice way to show up with clients too. See, like, yeah, we're all on this journey together, and we might be focusing on different things, but there's this sort of shared humanity that goes beyond all of the concepts and diagnoses and that kind of thing that I find to be pretty special.
Yeah, I so appreciate so much of what you're naming and what keeps kind of like, I don't know, what feels like a theme for me right now in my life that I'm kind of hearing you speak to is this piece around like we're all on this journey, we're all developing and like how we're relating to our strategies. Not that the strategies disappear, because they won't. They won't completely go away. But what I'm really hearing and what you're saying is that like you're able to relate to it differently, and that's so beautiful. I think for our clients, our patients to see us hold it that way too, like we don't put ourselves on some, pedestal and we're the authority, we're the expert or whatever, that we really are in that journey, like you said, with them. And I think that's really beautiful. And even just saying that, like, I find my body just kind of like relaxing, like, yeah, even in this moment, we're humans, yeah.
Yeah. I relate to something, that Alex, you touched on, was this idea of we can be messy and we're still, growing, or we're still, that's part of the process. Is I mentioned before, one of my strategies was to kind of have the answers, have it put together, I related to what you shared about Alex, about being like a good team player and show up and, and all those parts are still me. However, it's like this idea that I get to be messy, I get to be a work in progress, and I still am healing. And I'll be honest, right now in this moment, it feels really true to believe that. But there are moments in my life where I'm like, I find myself still trying to be perfect or get it right. And I'm like, oh, that pressure that I'm putting on myself to get it right is what's pulling me away from doing it authentically and beautifully and messy. And I even think about recording this podcast, letting myself, checking in with myself and saying, you're gonna misstep, you're gonna say something maybe don't mean to say or have to take back, and like, let it happen. And there's something that's so beautiful about that I'm just like, right now, I really feel close to that, and I'm like embracing it, which feels great. And I hope to remember this moment in times when I feel further away, more disconnected to those parts of me. One of the things that I'm currently working on, and this is new, so I'm going to put it out there, I can continue to help myself work on it, is a lot of times we've heard this saying about between the stimulus and the response, there is where we have choice, where we have options to choose what we say or do. And part of knowing what to do or what to say all the time put me in a place where I'm an external processor. I always had an answer really quick. I used to joke about, when I'm saying something to you, it's also the first time I'm hearing it. Like, I don't know what I'm going to say until I say it. And so I really, this year in the master's training, I kind of had this epiphany of like, nobody has a space between those two things. And then I realized, wait a minute, why did I think that no one had a space? There's lots of people with big spaces where they take time to think about what to say or how to respond, and it was really eye-opening, and it brought a lot of grief to me that I didn't give myself that space. And so this year for me is all about growing that space. And so sometimes it is behavioral, of taking a beat before I am, the stimulus of like having a reaction to something before I act on it, really giving myself space. And it is such a scary place because I've never been there. And so that's something I'm working on. It actually makes me want to plug space that's coming out too, because I was like,
that too.
It's all about working in that between space. And truly, before I even knew about space coming out, this was something I was like, oh, I need to work on. And then I'm like, are you kidding me? How can I not do space? This is exactly what I'm saying I want to focus on.
Well, and the fact that you're clearly not alone in needing to work on that, they created a whole program for all of us that are recognizing there's that piece that we're wanting to work on.
I love that. That does make me feel like maybe my initial thought of like, okay, no one has space.
A lot of us are trying to work on that.
Yeah. So, and it's such a empowering thing to be like, I care about myself enough to have a reaction and then choose what I do with it. I also, like, this statement has become really strong for me of like, I can be angry and do nothing about it or tell no one about it. And I used to always believe that if I feel something, I have to share it. The person has to know about it. That's me being authentic. If I'm not sharing it, I'm not authentic. Or if I'm not reacting to it, that's not real or passionate. And it is such a different flip for me of like, wow, I get to sacredly hold my anger and have it, and not in a way that it's trapped in me, but in a way that it's, special to me. That anger came from somewhere. It was a protest of something. And so that for me is like, there's a lot of grief in this space, and there's a lot of excitement and healing. And so I'm very excited about the space program to see how that can help with it. But I'm doing it just every day. I'm asking myself, how can I make that space a little bigger? So
Yeah. Yeah, as you were talking, it kind of something came up for me. I do this work with the center, and there's some people I report to and things that I need to share and get feedback on. And sometimes I'll I'll send off an email or I'll leave a voice note or something, and I'll be waiting. There's this part of me that needs the feedback. I need to know right now. And they're giving themselves space. They're like, I need a minute to think about this. And I'm like, I need information. And I'm just thinking about how that's one more area that I've recognized. It's not an emergency. It's okay to send an email. And what am I doing with kind of the discomfort that I'm noticing? Can I kind of breathe through it? Can I give myself the space as they're taking the space that they absolutely can have? So anyway, that's just a little peek into what was, as you were talking about it, I was having my own kind of parallel process talking about ways that I too, I'm trying to create more space for myself. So
I relate to that for sure.
Yeah. 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 So again, I'm just appreciating you both just sharing what's real for you and how this work has impacted you both professionally, but also personally. Can we name and talk about some of the things that you're doing in Utah?
Yeah, I can get us started here. So we've got a cool mental health community here in Salt Lake. I think there's a lot of really specific dynamics around the culture and specifics of Utah that I think are really unique and interesting. And I think broadly speaking, I see the culture of our area of the state really seeking out and wanting good mental health care. And so it's been fun to see how, my evolution in NARM, and now more and more sort of folks I see, connections that I've made here, people who come into the trainings, by their own journeys, have created a pretty strong little crew. Like Brad came for an intro workshop last year, and I think we had probably 30 or 35 people, which I felt really proud of. I was like, yeah, nice job.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And I think that really sparked my excitement because I kind of knew about all those people individually. It's just small enough community, but hadn't really seen us all in the same room together. And so it was, I think it was shortly following that the conversation started to happen in anticipation of potentially hosting an in-person training here in 2026. And so since then, Sabrena and I have sort of taken it on as our personal mission. Here's where our team player strategies really come into play is we are really wanting to get the word out there. I think it's, the level 2 trainings are offered online. And I think there's something that's really unique and really special about, particularly in a local region like us, to have that in-person experience, to connect with people during breaks and over lunchtime, and then become, a network for referrals and support and consultation. So I'm really looking forward. I feel really excited at the prospect of building more into that community here. And so we've got Sabrena and I have, I think, probably 8 or 9 at this point over the course of the next 9-10 months at sort of different places. We're putting our sort of marketing hats on to see nice. Okay, what's the different, the areas that we can present at. We're doing one in Park City. We'll be doing several in Salt Lake area. And then further south, we're also giving ourselves an excuse to take a long weekend up in Jackson Hole. And they're talking about doing an intro up there, because we're the closest really big city to them. There's a really strong mental health community there too. So I think we're in the mode of just trying to get the word out however we can. And even if folks come to the intros and, it doesn't make sense for them to do the in-person training or whatever it might be, my hope is that there's, exposure to a model and an understanding of complex developmental relational trauma that can be, introduced and supportive whatever modality you're using. I think for me, it was a really meaningful way of just understanding people and symptoms and the experience in therapy. And, if you come away only knowing that and decide not to, pursue trainings or whatever it might be any further, that, I think that's in support of this broader mission that we all really connect to. So what would you add to that, Sabrena?
I think you did a beautiful job of summing up what we're planning to do. And yeah, I agree with Alex in the sense of I would love people to join the in-person one in Salt Lake City area, but I also would be so excited for just more people to learn about NARM. And the intro is such a great way to do that. And often you can get CEUs for coming. And so I think, that can draw people in as well. Why not learn about something new? And that, I think someday complex PTSD will be in the DSM. I really hope. And it also will be a lot more known out there. And so I hope that NARM can be a big part of that. So yeah, I'm excited to do some of these intros.
Awesome. So folks kind of all in the Utah area, even up in Jackson.
Yeah, Jackson's in Wyoming, but it's the largest city.
Yeah. Anyone kind of in that area or in a nearby state who might be interested in attending one of these intros, where would they find the information for that?
Yeah, we're doing our best to get all the dates up on the CTTC website, wherein people can register for the different workshops and that kind of thing. And certainly, we can share our contact information and if people want to reach out more individually too.
So all of these intros are leading up to the therapist training that's going to be happening next year. And that's, again, another thing folks can look forward to if they're in a place to be able to travel to Utah or live in that community, in that nearby area where they can maybe drive or be closer, that they can also be a part of that level 2 training. And like Alex said, there is just something really special about, I don't know if it's the energy or what you want to call it, but there's just so much that you feel with that in-person experience. And then in addition to, like you said, even some of the practicalities of like just connecting for referrals and all of that sort of thing, really diving in and being part of the community is such a cool part of those in-person experiences. So awesome. Well, is there anything else either of you want to share around all of this that we've been exploring together?
I just hope that people connected with something that was said by either myself or Alex or, you, Emily, and that if they want to learn more about it, that they go to the Complex Trauma Training Center to learn more about how they can get involved in whatever way feels right for them at this time.
Thank you. And Alex, anything from you?
I think I would just piggyback on that, appreciation for you both and for the folks listening that, consider us both, resources if you're just curious to learn more about this or that kind of thing and you're somewhere in the area, it's obviously something that we have a lot of passion about and excitement for. So, whether you're able to meet us, more directly and join one of the workshops, that would be really great. But, feel free to reach out in other ways too, because this is something that we really care a lot about and look forward to trying to build a bigger boat in that respect.
I love it.
Yeah. If you see us in an intro or something and you listen to this podcast, please come up and we'd be happy to answer more questions or talk in a more personal way. So love to meet more people through this community.
Okay. Well, thank you again, both of you. I appreciate you just showing up with your hearts and being so open and willing to connect with folks in the community. So thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Emily.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more information about our guest, check the show notes or visit us at complextraumatrainingcenter.com/transforming trauma. You can also connect with us in other ways. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. As a mental health professional, your commitment to healing and growth inspires us. We at the Complex Trauma Training Center are committed to supporting you in your well-being and success. That's why we're honored to invite you to our Space Program 2025, an interdevelopment program of support and self-discovery for therapists on the personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal levels. This interactive experiential learning program is designed to support self-care and self-discovery for therapists, exploring internally, relationally, and transpersonally. CTTC faculty will welcome you into a professional community of therapists that are seeking to create greater effectiveness and resilience in our professional lives. As CTTC faculty Brad Kammer says, the intent is that this program will help us not only become more effective therapists, but also love our work more. Please visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com and secure your spot in the 2025 Space Program. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Elisa Sponseller for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.